Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
I'm doing real well, King. Always good to be with you here on a Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern.
Same here. Same here. So, speaking of which, what would you say your spiritual energy level is?
I'm at a 10. I had a good morning so far, and this conversation with you typically keeps my energy up there, and I'm looking forward to this and the rest of the day. So I've got some good energy flowing.
Well, I match your energy as well. I'm at a 10, and you know me, I don't see any reason to choose a number less than 10. But getting up, staying committed to working out, getting a walk in, it just really keeps me or sets my morning because I kept my word to myself. So, I'm beginning to view working out. And I realize everything's about how you view things, but I'm beginning to view working out in the morning as for me, as opposed to something I have to do to stay in shape. So my mindset is I know I'm getting me that's something that's for me out of the way early in the morning. So once I get that, then the rest of the day is a breeze at that point, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I like that.
And that's a segue into what I'm grateful for. So I'm grateful for the ability to wake up in the morning and have a sound mind, and at the same time, the ability to walk, talk, stand and breathe, and hear and see as well. Thankful for a mother who's alive and where I can still experience and still feel the essence of her love energy. And I'm grateful for roof over my head, food to eat. Grateful for opportunity to continue to grow and learn new things, and every day become more fully human in my journey. And finally, I'm grateful for the infinite possibilities that this day is going to provide. So, how about yourself? What's your gratitude moment?
Yeah, so I'm just grateful for my two standards are indoor plumbing and a refrigerator with food in it, which implies electricity as well. And those are just blessings that I get up and there's food. I mean, that's not a lot of people, not everybody on the planet has that. So I'm always grateful for that, grateful for the most part having a body that works well and a mind, as far as I can tell, that seems to make sense when I talk to other people. And just the blessings of, I'm looking outside right now, we're getting a lot of rain up here, as I mentioned before we got on. And, it's kind of a dreary day in one regard, but we've had, a little bit of snow, a lot of rain this winter. And for those people who have, I get my water from a well. This house has a well, and there's plenty of water, and there's places where there's not a lot of water. So there's just a lot I'm grateful for in terms of basic, physiological and secure safety and security, needs, and a lot more, but that'll suffice for now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, just one correction I want to throw at you is you said if you have a food in the fridge, it implies electricity. You could actually have an ice box.
Well, interestingly, so I'm glad you said that, because my maternal grandfather, who came into Ellis Island in around 1898 or so, right to turn in the 19th and 20th century, he's an Italian peasant, and he always he died when I was in my early 20s. But as I was growing up, he was a great guy, storyteller, but he would always refer to the refrigerator, even once he had electricity. He didn't always have it, but the refrigerator was always the ice box. And so, to the extent that one of my younger cousins, who lived in the same house with my grandparents, he was the youngest of 7 kids, until he was about 8 or 9 years old, because he was with my grandfather a lot, he always referred, this little English-speaking kid referred to the refrigerator as the ice box. So, but you're right. Yeah, that was the first stage of what we now call refrigerators. It was an insulated box that had ice in it, would keep food fresh for a while. So yeah.
I've always heard that, but the only images I ever saw of it was watching Three Stooges, and I remember them delivering ice, in its fullness. But those episodes stand out in my mind. So I least from the TV, got a chance to see how that process worked. But of course, by the time I was coming up, there was refrigerator. And, well, people still refer to it as icebox, so it wasn't uncommon to hear that term icebox and knowing that they actually meant refrigerator. So
yeah.
I think the generations that use that terminology are not in the zeitgeist anymore. So you don't get to hear that expression anymore as much as you used to hear.
Yeah.
I think I might even heard that episode on Archie Bunker episode once. He might mention the icebox. I could be mistaken, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, as they say, you can't go wrong with the Three Stooges and Archie Bunker. So,
yeah, I'm reaching the past now to get my entertainment, my humor, my laughs. So, and comedy was simple in that context. But what do you choose as our topic for today's discussion?
Yeah, so for today, we're going to move in a direction we really haven't gone before. We're going to take what we've been talking about in terms of American history and some of the current events we point to. Again, all in the context of healing America's narratives and resolving our shadow issues. I'll just say those out loud again: ignorance, arrogance, fear, bigotry, violence, greed, excess, bullying, and untrustworthiness. Those are the things, the parts of this country that many tens of millions of Americans deny are true. And we want to look to, because it's in the news every day now, we want to look to a movement. It's not a new movement, but it's more vocal and more mainstream now than it's been. And that's, I'm going to use this phrase to describe it, but there are different layers of it. So the general term I'm going to use is white Christian nationalism. All right? That doesn't refer to all evangelical Christians or fundamentalist Christians, but it is a thing in and of itself, and it typically is characterized by a desire for three things. It's based on the myth that the country was founded by white Christian men, and it wasn't. The founders were a mix of Christians, Unitarians, Roman Catholics, and some others, but I forget the list. But it wasn't all Christian men, and it believes in, it fights for the United States becoming a Christian nation because that's what God wants it to be. The United States was God's gift to humanity, like a beacon and an example for the rest of humanity to follow. And there are three basic components to white Christian nationalism. One is the idea of freedom, and that basically means freedom from government intervention. They don't want the government having too much control. Order. They want order, and it's a hierarchical order where white Christian men are on top, and everybody else is, if you're not white, if you're not Christian, you're not a man, you're below them. And violence, which is necessary in order to preserve freedom and maintain order. So again, white Christian nationalism isn't something that every Christian embraces, or that every, especially evangelical Christian embraces, because it's really easy to conflate these, but there is overlap there. So that's the one piece. Related to that, and overlapping with it, but not the same as it, is a really powerful interconnectedness of organizations. And I would argue that the Council for National Policy, abbreviated as CNP, which began in the early 80s, is the members of that, the founders of that Council for National Policy and members of it are all over the Republican Party. They have something to do with white Christian nationalism, although not all members of the Council for National Policy are white Christian nationalists. Some are. And they include some very, very powerful families, powerful in terms of finance. I'll mention some of the names in a few minutes, names of the families. And a lot of these like groups that fall underneath or associated with the Council for National Policy include groups such as, and you've heard of these, the Heritage Foundation, the Family Research Council, Americans for Prosperity, the Campus Victory Project, the Conservative Political Action Conference, CPAC, which just had their annual meeting this past week, Focus on the Family, the Cato Institute, the Southern Baptist Convention, the National Rifle Association, and others. There are many. And what they began to do in the 1980s and did a superlative job with in the 2016 election, leading up to the 2016 election, they organized really well. They used technology. They met and recognized that they didn't have exactly the same beliefs, but there were enough things in common that they could work together. And they effectively got Donald Trump elected without the Council for National Policy and these other groups, which include, some of the names are the Prince families, the DeVos families, the Koch brothers, and all of their money, through the Council for National Policy and a really powerful integration of technology. Without their money and organization, Donald Trump would never have been elected president. And what they did, because most of them are Christians, and many of them didn't like Donald Trump at all. They knew his history, kind of, as a confidence man, a con man. He wasn't particularly conservative, if you look at his political history. When it came to taxes, he was, but in terms of being pro-life, he was not. He believed in a woman's right to choose, ironic as that may be because of his history with not treating women well. He never came out and did anything about being against same-sex marriage. And what ended up happening was they told him, we can support you, but here is your agenda. Our agenda has to be your agenda. And he basically said, if you'll support me financially, I'll say whatever you want me to say. Mm-hmm. And that's effectively what happened. So the agenda basically was anti-abortion, anti-same-sex marriage, anti-immigrant, lower taxes, and controlling the judiciary, appointing just judges on the state and local levels to get more and more people who were Christian and right-leaning into the judiciary, especially on the federal level, but in the state level as well, in order to overturn Roe v. Wade, which they succeeded at. And he appointed 3 justices, and they succeeded at that. So it's a very, very powerful interconnection of organizations that don't always agree on every issue, but saw the strength in fighting against what they characterize as woke America, which means a more moderate or left-leaning agenda that welcomes immigrants, that believes in a woman's right to choose, that supports anybody's right to marry, that doesn't want high taxes, but sees the value in taxation in order to provide social programs to help people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So last thing I'll say, because I know I'm laying a lot out here just to begin this conversation. They're powerful, but they're also a minority. And by a minority, I mean there may be a third, in the vicinity of a third of people who are eligible to vote in this country. So if everybody voted in this country, someone like Donald Trump or the next far-right believer, which Mike Pence actually is. Donald Trump was a make-believer. Mike Pence really believes that stuff. He's part of the Council for National Policy, but also probably has more integrity than Trump did or does. But if everybody in this country voted, someone like Trump would lose in a landslide. He lost by 8 million votes to Biden and by 3 million votes approximately to Hillary Clinton. Only the Electoral College got him elected. In 2016, the highest percentage of votes in this country went to did not vote. So 33% of registered voters didn't vote in the Trump-Clinton contest. and 7% of Americans who could register weren't registered. So that was just under 41% of Americans who could have voted didn't. Clinton won about 29% of the votes, and Trump won about 28% of the votes. In the absence of this Council for National Policy and this belief in white Christian nationalism, Donald Trump gets nowhere near the White House. And the left, moderate and far left, are way less organized than the right. They have all of their agendas, the climate, race, gender, immigration, all that stuff, but they are not really as organized as the right is. So that's what we face currently. And anybody who hears this, if you listen to any of the speeches from the CPAC convention this past week, you can hear that it's a real danger. They're saying out loud what you're looking at is the end of democracy. One of their speakers said that. We're moving toward a Christian nation because God wants America to be a Christian nation. And that used to be said behind closed doors. Now they're saying it out loud. So I'm going to put a period there because I unpacked a lot and see what's coming up for my friend King.
Well, you definitely, great topic, definitely very timely. You definitely laid out a lot. And I'll, just to start picking at some of the key points I want to make. Number one, for me, I'm kind of glad that that's now become mainstream, so we can see it now as opposed to it being hidden. Like I've always felt, and I've known for some time, but of all the organizations you named, the one I think that concerns me the most is the Federalist Society. And with their focus, again, runs very systematic, is to get the conservative judges at the federal and state level, and pretty much gives the president a list to choose when he's selecting Supreme Court justices to choose from this list. That to me is just really controlling. Controlling the courts pretty much controls obviously the laws, but in essence, it controls the United States. Because you could have judges at a local level who decide they want to give certain people harsher sentences, because they want to send that message. And of course, we know that can be very unjust depending on the race, ethnicity, gender, as well as lifestyle or who that person is that's before them. I've always felt the judges had too much power in my mind, just dealing with them at an early age on small things like traffic court and divorce court. That's the only course I've actually been in, concerning myself personally, and just that how humble you have to be, because you with this person, you want to get divorced. I got married at a very young age, and I got divorced at a very young age. I call it the football season of marriage in my mind, because it was. I always joke and say, which was not too much far off from the truth. I got married in week 1 and got divorced in week 6. So very quickly, I felt easy to get in, easy to get out, but having to go to court was so humiliating, and explaining to this person who has no interest or really no knowledge of who I am or my marriage, then the ultimate say is whether or not I can leave this woman legally. Not that to me was a very harsh lesson in the early 20s, and then just dealing with them with all the traffic issues I've had over the years, just being young and dumb, and of course the profiling I think played a part in it as well. So that is where it stings the most or stands out the most. But I also just really quickly talk about how you mentioned the fact that the left really has they don't have their act together, in so many words. And again, if you look at what the conservatives do, their branding, their marketing, they clear on who their target market is. And they clear on giving very simple things that people can remember. Like you laid out 4 or 5 key talking points that all those groups, even though they may have deeper agendas beyond the objectives that they're all working on individually, but at the core, that's what they want. So they all can agree upon those 5 things, keeping it white Christian men, in power, making decisions on everything else. That's what we all can agree upon at the very basic. And that's what the left is missing. The left is trying to do too much and appeal to too many people that they don't have a clear message that conveys to everybody who, their base comprises the majority of the people comprised in the left as far as their thinking. Most people want to give women the right to choose. And we've seen polls on that. Most people want people to even have free health care. Most people don't want to be racist or have hatred toward any particular group of people that you were to listen to or enact with most people. Most people are not racist in their actions or prejudiced in their thinking. So, but there is no collective agreement of what we really want. That's the problem I see the left has, and the right's clear what we want. I use an analogy of the highway, where you're on the highway and nobody had a beltway, and you're driving in the beltway. To me, the right is in the left lane. They know where they're going. They got the accelerator down, and they're mad at anybody that gets in their way. Right? They're riding right up on your bumper. They're flashing their lights. If you don't know where you're going, get over to the right. And then, honestly, the flip of that, the conservative, the liberals, the left, are kind of in the right lanes. This could be a good exit to get off on. This could be a good exit to get off on. So they're looking at every exit with the potential of getting off, even though they're both going in the same direction. But the left is more inclined to, let's stop, let's get off, let's engage in this kind of activity. The right, it's like, no, we know what we want. Here's where we're going. We're focused. Get out of our way, and we're going to do whatever it takes to get there. So it's not just, but it's effective, and that's what we see right now. And so much so that even now, what Trump is saying, and we keep talking about Trump, obviously, because like you, I don't really believe Trump believes what his position, his platform that he runs on. I don't believe that's his message, to your point.
Yeah, it's not his. If he had to do all those things to get the money that was available to him, so he basically is he's not the puppet master.
And he's willing to be the face of it as well. Like I'll take the backlash. I'll take the heat. I'm willing to stand there and take all the blows that's going to come as a result of me making these statements, because he's an opportunist at the end of the day. He sees an opportunity, and he has tapped into hate is a very strong motivation. If you're a lazy person and you really don't want to do much, hate can get you that, as you talked about earlier, that little burst of energy that can get some things done that normally wouldn't be there if you didn't have the energy of hate as your emotion guiding you. And Trump taps into that because it's that base of white poor and white lower to poor who has felt that America has abandoned them. And so that message appeals to them. And so they ride or die with Trump because he's the only one willing to put that out there on Front Street and say, I'll listen to you, I connect with you. Even though we all know that's not true, he doesn't. But he still speaks their language. It's like having that, in the Black community, we always had that one politician that can come into the community and what separate him from other politicians was he was willing to be able to talk the slang and knew what cool words to say and willing to eat certain of the traditional foods. So he seemed more of a person that was for the people, even though he wasn't going to do much for the people more than other political people. Maybe actually his candidates, his opponents would probably done more, but they felt that this person connects and understands me more. And so that to me is where we are. Obviously, you laid it out from that being planned. I'm glad you brought that up because I think most people don't talk about the structure, the infrastructure that the white Christian nationalists have developed and what they're doing on so many different levels and how they're attacking, again, the various systems, keeping those enforced. Education, financial, healthcare, criminal justice, to keep these systems still operating under those four areas. So definitely, for choosing this topic and laying out what we need to be mindful of.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize one thing that white Christian nationalism is this one really not particularly. They're not really an organization. It's a worldview. It's a way of viewing what they want the country to be. And again, not every Christian and not everybody who voted for Donald Trump would be a white Christian nationalist.
Right.
Some, like the Koch brothers, their money came out of the energy industry. I believe oil and something else. One of them is deceased now. But some members of this large coalition that helped elect Trump, they're just free enterprise people. They believe in capitalism, free market capitalism. They want to be able to make as much money as possible. They want the government to get out of the way. Then there's others with some overlap who are really into the religious belief that abortion is wrong and that homosexuality is evil. And they want to oppose gay marriage, and they want to oppose a woman's right to choose. And there are other interrelated groups. I'm sure there are some people who agree with every box on the agenda. They could check all of those lists. But what they were able to do, because they saw the value in getting the judiciary more conservative, they were able to split the difference and kind of Donald Trump sold his soul to them for money, and they sold their collective souls to Donald Trump because they thought he was the guy that would do whatever that they paid him to do.
Right.
And one of the things that really struck me in my researching this, and I'm going to mention one book in particular if anybody's really intrigued and wants to really get into the nuts and bolts of the power of the organization and what happens around elections. I'm going to mention the book in just a second. But the Council for National Policy, when it came into being in the early 80s, their founders, and I'm pretty sure the three men credited with founding them were named Morton Blackwell, Paul Weyrich, and Richard Viguerie. And they discovered three truths early on. They were young men in the 70s and 80s. So one of the truths in terms of getting someone elected, being right is irrelevant to political victory. The side that's right doesn't necessarily win. So that's one thing. They built that into their strategy. 2, election winners are determined by the number and effectiveness of activists and leaders. All right. And finally, the number and effectiveness of activists and leaders is determined by the political technology used. The phone apps and computer technology that were used during the 2016 election and also in the 2020 election, but they lost. But the number of apps and the research they did, I mean, especially in the center of the country, they didn't try to change too many votes in New York and San Francisco because that wasn't where they were going to get votes. But in the middle of the country, once people put an app on their phone or they signed up for one of these organizations, they just gave them information. They knew who liked to go fishing, who watched NASCAR, who liked football, who was a gun owner, who wasn't a gun owner, who went to church regularly, who didn't. And they had in-person canvassers going door to door across the middle of the country. And on the tablet, they had a profile of who was going to answer the door. So they knew they can't, like, if I wouldn't, well, they could find out about me too, because I have an online presence. But they knew a lot about the people who were going to open the door. So they knew how to talk to the person who didn't own guns, but didn't like homosexuality, and wasn't sure about a woman's right to choose. So they had all of this information, and they could tailor one-on-one conversations because of the technology. And they did a really powerful job again in 2016, even though Trump lost the popular vote. They were not as effective in 2020, mainly because enough Americans saw who Trump really was and what he did. So, but there's a real, the idea you don't have to be right in order to win. And they were fine telling complete lies. I mean, the 2016 election, one of the big lies on the abortion issue, this was just one that stood out to me, was Ted Cruz said this out loud over and over again about Hillary Clinton, that Hillary Clinton believes in abortion right up to the delivery date. That Hillary Clinton believed, they basically called it, she would abort a viable fetus, 9 months after conception. There's no truth to that. But they repeated things like that over and over again, and they turned her into this Satan to people who either willfully or unwillfully remained ignorant of the truth, who didn't find out, was that really true? Would somebody really think that was okay? But there were enough Americans who were willfully blind to that kind of lie. So it's a fairly powerful machine, which I believe can be overcome primarily by everybody who's eligible to vote voting. Again, notice that I'm not saying everybody who's progressive should vote. Everybody in this country who is of voting age needs to register and vote. You're going to vote Republican, vote Republican. You're going to vote Democrat, vote Democrat. If you're an independent, unaffiliated, do that, but vote. Because otherwise you're letting a small number of people decide who gets elected. And that's a real, real problem with anything remotely resembling a democracy.
Well, I want to add something to that as well. I want to add vote informed. In other words, I think to me it's a completely an insult when I walk up to a poll to vote, a polling or location to vote, voting location, I should say, I'm sorry, to vote. And people are standing outside and they hand me a brochure, a list of all the candidates that are for that particular party. If I'm making my decision then based off that brochure, I don't need to be voting. I should already have my mind made up who I'm voting for the most part. Like, definitely for president, definitely for, if it's any kind of Republic or U.S. representative, Senate or House, and some local council individuals, I should already know who I'm voting and why. And if I have to be told at that poll, at right there at the location, who I should vote for, or just vote completely on the left side because, it's biased and vote everything, Democrat. And I'm doing it just because I've been told that to me is where I think what's wrong with Americans' voting system now. Because people are voting and they're not politically astute, they're not politically aware, they're voting because of what they've been told. And so then what it creates is where you can just create sound bites and lie, to your point. Now, what always, I would say, what I find to be interesting is how folks who are so adamant about pro-life individuals who are really adamant about it and using religion to back up their argument as though they have that moral ground, are completely opposite when it comes to the death penalty. They believe in death penalty. So it's like you lose all your argument when you are for the death penalty. You say, I'm for this life here that's unborn, this doesn't have a name, doesn't really have an existence here on the planet, on this earth yet. I'm fighting for their rights to live. But this person who is already alive, that's already a part of the planet, you feel that they have the right, they should die. That to me throws your morality question out of it and just strictly makes it political for your own basis. And I wish they would be called to the mat on that more often. So that to me is a false narrative that we just accept. And we let people have that moral argument. And it's like that to me, they should be, every time someone makes that statement about really being a religious advocate for, or you quoting the Bible to justify their pro-life stance, they should be called to task on what's your feeling of the death penalty. Because you can't be pro-life one minute and pro-death and another based on the situation and circumstance. That to me doesn't fit a true principle-centered or a person of integrity. That's really where you stand.
Well, yeah, and I agree with you. And it's really more of a, I've heard the critique that pro-life is really a pro-birth stance. It's not a pro-life stance. Because once a child is born, the people on the right aren't that interested in funding early childhood education, helping poor mothers. All that help and agenda comes from the progressives and the left. So it's, but 100%. And, part of the argument would be, well, if you're in prison on death penalty, you probably killed somebody and you broke the commandments and God said, thou shalt not kill. I'm not making that argument, but I can imagine somebody making that argument. But yeah, so there's a lot of contradiction, and there's a willingness to know that I'm wrong, lie anyway in order to get the political success that I think I want. That's
Right.
what's out there. And I'm not saying that the left doesn't do that at some level, but they're amateurs compared to what the right do.
Yeah, and the left does it in the context of what makes it feel good. So the left's whole agenda is arguing that we're going to tell you what you want to hear because it sounds good to you. We're going to say we want to end homelessness. That sounds good. We want to say that we want to make it equal to all. Equal education across the board should be equal, right? Knowing those things are not going to be enforced, but it sounds good. We want to raise minimum wage. See, those things sound good, but they're not practical when you really begin to look at it in the context of how you're going to implement it. You know, but that's what left runs on, and people vote based off that. So to me, to your point, both sides throw things out there that sound good to their base, but like I said, to me, I think the right has more hate as far as an emotion, and that's what gets them riled up. Because you can really, because now, as you said, several things you said as far as what the white Christian nationalists stand for was anti-immigration, anti-LGBTQ. That was also anti-woke, which African Americans or Black Americans' history and treatment gets thrown in there as well. So,
yeah.
In essence, now that they want to admit they're anti-Black, but at the same time, to me, if you're going to say, well, I'm not going to teach my kids, I'm going to outlaw books that teach real history. Okay, not necessarily, all white people were bad. I agree. You can't make that kind of generalization, but you cannot not argue that you cannot dismiss the fact that slavery did exist, that Harriet Tubman, what she did and who she stood for, who she fought against, who were the enemies to humanity at that point need to be called out. And to say we're not going to have that or have those books that teach that, to me, is just as racist as the folks who were doing those behaviors when it was going on. There's no difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
so go ahead.
No, so I want to mention the book before I forget to do that, in case anybody's interested. And this is the book that connects the organizations with the Council for National Policy really being kind of like the umbrella organization where a lot of the power lies. But the author is Ann Nelson, and the book is entitled Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. And it was published in 2019, so it's pretty much accurate through the midterms, right up until the 2018 midterms, and then it got published. But it just names names, it connects the dots, and it's all research based. So it's not she's not somebody sitting around like watching television and making stuff up. So you can go and find her primary sources. I think it's the best book I've come across so far that puts a lot of really grounded, provable, evidence-based information in one place. So again, Ann Nelson's Shadow Network. But I want to return to something you said about people being uninformed on the voting line and just kind of doing what they're told. Because one of the things that you and I have been talking about, and that is in the book, the primary part of the book, is development. And the shorthand for development that we've been using is 4 basic levels of adult development. Me-centrism, it's all about me. Us-centrism, it's all about us and our group, or our groups, if we have more than one. All of us centrism, which is about human centrism. Oh, I see that we're all human and we should get along and we should be treated equally. And then one that virtually nobody reaches is all that is. You care about the environment, about humans, about the planet, about everything. There are people who espouse that, and there are a few that actually live it, but that's a real minority among the 8 billion people that we have today. But back to your point about people, just kind of voting according to the most recent brochure they have or what somebody else says. That's an example of an unhealthy, us-centric view. And that's where the majority of Americans live. Not unhealthy necessarily, but that us-centric thing. I'm a Democrat, or I'm a Republican, or I'm an independent. I'm a New Yorker. I'm a Alabama, I'm a whatever. I belong to all these different things, and here's what I'm supposed to do. One of the primary researchers for adult development, Robert Keegan, who is Harvard, I think he's retired now, but Harvard professor. And he's his model, I think, might have been the first to really say, we continue to develop. And the language that he used is really, really specific, and it makes it even more, it provides more clarity than the move from me to us to all of us. What he called his third order of consciousness, I think it was the third one, was the socialized mind. I'm just going to let that sit for a second, the socialized mind. So my worldview, if that's how I'm looking at things, is the conglomeration of all of the things that society gives me, what you and I have been referring to as cultural givens. And I haven't yet learned to think for myself in a positive way. So I'm no longer selfish, like it's all about me, but I'm stuck with this socialized mind. The next level, the fourth level in Keegan's model, is actually called the self-authoring mind, where I begin to tell my own story. I'm an independent thinker. I do my research. I question things. So that's a great example of the language. If I'm in a socialized mind, I'm going to be stuck in a us-centric worldview. Once I move to a self-authoring mind, I have the ability to step back and say, oh, okay, my groups aren't necessarily bad, but they're not that different from those groups. And the most important group is the human group. So now I can, by self-authoring my story, I can say, wow, all humans are equal and deserve equal rights, or whatever, conclusion I'm going to draw. But I wanted to come back to that because Keegan's language, I mean, again, almost everybody cites Keegan, other researchers, because he was one of the first to really research adults. The example that you gave, man, if you show up at the polling place and you're still able to be influenced by, somebody who's 75 feet away, they have to be, but handing out pamphlets, and that will influence who you vote for. That's problematic for sure. So I agree, but that was a great point that you made. And again, that's a socialized mind. All of this stuff's coming at me, and I believe what I'm told to believe. And that's not a measure of adulthood by any measure.
I remember you originally turned me on to Keegan and shared that with me. And I thought that was fascinating. And what stands out in my mind, I just want to give you an opportunity, because I think a lot of people who may be new to this conversation that we're having right now as relates to Keegan, is how do you make that shift from the socialized mind to the self-authoring mind? How do you begin to put yourself on that growth path?
Yeah, so great question. And there are some answers that address it. I'm not aware of an answer that says this is the way to do it. So that's my caveat, because there are lots of people who have, especially now with information technology, I can expose myself to anything, any viewpoint, because it's all out there. If I'm willing to do some work, I can find it. 40 years ago, it was harder. You had to go to a library or buy a book or listen to somebody speak or whatever it was, or read the newspaper. Now it's like you can sit home with your potato chips and your beer and just, search for stuff. And I like both potato chips and beer, so that wasn't like negative. But to your question, one of the things that happens where people begin to make the move, and we'll just stay with that language, from socialized mind to self-authoring, is they begin to feel a vague or even an acute sense of dissatisfaction with their life and how what they believe matches up with the world they're living in. So they're getting all this stuff from the society, and they're seeing kind of let's say cognitive dissonance. Oh, but this is what society is giving me, but my experience is different. So what some people would do with that experience, you're feeling that dissonance, is to get curious. And when you get curious, if you're willing to take action, you begin to do some research, some learning on your own. Maybe you talk to people who have different views. Maybe you read a book that you didn't think you would really enjoy because it didn't line up with your socialized perspectives. And again, we're not talking about socialism when I say that. I'm talking about being the recipient of what society gives you. So a vague sense of dissatisfaction leading to taking a closer look at what society is giving me, leading to curiosity about what else is out there, and in doing some work. That's one way it can happen. Another way it can happen is in trauma recovery. If something traumatic happens, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to recover with the help of others through the trauma, very often my worldview shifts. That's another possibility. That's obviously not the one you choose, because nobody wants to have to experience a real trauma in order to grow or develop. But back to the question, but some people feel the vague sense of dissatisfaction with the socialized view that they have. And for whatever reason, and this is the part that is still a mystery, I think, to most researchers, definitely to me, but I'm not a primary researcher, is some people hit that dissatisfaction with what society is giving them, and they double down on their belief system. So rather than trying to say, okay, let me see what else is out there, they just say, this doesn't feel good, but I know it's right, so I'm going to double down on my belief system. So that's the difference between somebody who doubles down and stays stuck and even becomes fundamentalist, as opposed to somebody who has that dissatisfaction, gets curious, begins to look around, and is open. Why one person makes the double down move and the other makes the open up move, that probably has a lot to do with their family of origin, their level of education, their childhood, which is part of the family of origin, and then other factors too that are probably pretty numerous and complex that I don't feel qualified to speak into. But that's the mystery for a lot of folks. Why does somebody faced with what I'm believing is not true double down and strike out against it, against others, and somebody else says, wow, I've been wrong about this, or there's more to the story, whatever thing it is, and then go find out more and continue to grow? Because what you learn then is each new learning or each new worldview, each new developmental level is not the end of the story. Oh, I can grow through there. Because in Keegan's model, the next step, you go from socialized mind to self-authoring mind to self-transforming mind, where you're not only able to write your own story, you're able to act on your own worldview in a way that transforms you, which is a whole another game entirely. And very few adults in this country on the planet actually live at that level. There are quite a few at the self-authoring mind, much more still at the socialized mind, though, statistically. So I hope I did some service to your question.
Excuse me for that. Alarm went off. You did. And it brings another question to mind. I know we're near the top of the hour, but my question is, would you say it's a one-to-one correlation from the person who has a socialized mind and then doubles down, that they're also doubling down because they're going along the victimhood mentality? Is that victimhood a one-on-one correlation between the person doubling down? Because through that doubling down, what it's saying is, here's why this is happening to you. They find that answer or that rationale within that double down, or it could be, or it doesn't necessarily have to be a one-to-one correlation.
I think my best answer, if I understand the question accurately, is that it could be and I want to go back to socialized mind again, / an us-centric view, because it's about us and the society, what society gives us. Not every, socialized mind isn't a bad thing. It's a natural stage of development. So I can be socialized in a really positive way. So I think you're hitting on something here. If I've been socialized in an unhealthy way, that everything happens to me and those people are to blame for my miserable life and yada, all of that stuff, that I already have that victim mentality, there's a much better chance that I'm going to double down and strike out, strike out at other people. If my socialization has been pretty positive, where I don't feel like a victim, but I still haven't learned to think for myself yet, I'm still socialized. When I hit that cognitive dissonance, I'm more likely to get curious and begin to do some research. So that could be a one-on-one, but it's more likely a one-on-one correlation if I already have the predisposition that I'm a victim. So did that like come close to addressing what you asked?
Yes,
Yeah,
it did. I know we got kind of deeper down, maybe, and I'm glad because that's where the conversation went, instead of just staying strictly on the white Christian nationalists. But I see them as doubling down. I see them as that being the condition of what they're doing, even though they may sit here and say, I can see where they might not necessarily be morally correct, but overall, the trade-offs, again, when the time was sold, there is no right and wrong. There's just good trade-offs. And asking, can you accept these trade-offs compared to these trade-offs? Because there's going to be trade-offs on whatever the solution may be. Whatever direction you're going in, there's always going to be a trade-off. And you just saying to yourself, I'm comfortable with those trade-offs than these previous trade-offs or those trade-offs over there.
Yeah, I mean, the doubling down part of white Christian nationalism, I agree with that, because they really believe, those who are true believers, as opposed to just going along for some specific, unique political agenda. They really believe that this is a white Christian nation, that God wants it to be a white Christian nation, and they have an obligation to be free from too much government intervention, to maintain the hierarchical order with white Christian men on top, and to use violence as necessary to keep freedom and order. And as they see women get increasingly more power, that's not, the truth is, if certain translations of the book of Genesis, I don't know, that's a whole other thing we can look at that later on, but the conventional reading of the book of Genesis is that God's, all right, here's the man, he was lonely, here's a rib, create a woman, and women were subservient, basically. That's probably an incorrect reading of Genesis. I'm not a biblical scholar, but I read enough. So suddenly women have more power. The formerly enslaved people who were Black in the 20th and 21st centuries definitely have more power. Still not considered equal, but definitely have more power. And then the sinners against the natural world, right? Homosexuals are getting equal rights. And when I say sinners against the natural world, I'm referring to how white Christian nationalists would refer to them. That's not my view, obviously. So all of the heathens, basically, all of the people that aren't supposed to have any power are getting more. And by 2050, I think it is, if you're white in America, there will, white people in America will be fewer than 50% of the population. There won't be one other group that has more, but all the other groups together will have more. So Latinos and Blacks and Asians, etc. And that's part of their fear as well, because those people aren't white Christians. And they loosely hold white. And this is the last thing I'll say, because there are some people who are not skin pigmented white who believe in some of the agenda of the white Christian nationalism. So they just call it Christian nationalism. But if you listen to Tim Scott talk, if you listen to somebody we mentioned, I think last week, Ben Carson talk, and Ben Carson was again a gift to humanity in his years as a surgeon. If you listen to Clarence Thomas talk, I mean, they're kind of on board with white Christian nationalism, and they're often paraded. Less so Clarence Thomas, because Supreme Court justices aren't supposed to be paraded around and be political. But look, these people believe the same thing, and they're black. So it's but it's a white thing, because none of the founders were black, and people like Ben Carson and Tim Scott and others are exceptions, I think, to the rule. If you look at the families and the individuals who provide all of the funding, they're wealthy white families who've had money for decades.
Absolutely. And, Candace Owens' name right up there with those as well. And obviously they get paid, to have the position that they have. And they look out for themselves and their own agenda in that context. But I know we've reached a part of the show where we want to give folks some homework in some ways they can continue to be on their path of being fully human as it relates. So what solutions or steps, suggestions you want to share with our listening audience today?
Well, so just go back to what we spoke about 10 minutes ago, and that move, from the socialized mind to the self-authoring mind is when what society is giving you begins to feel off a little bit. Don't double down on your beliefs, but get curious about what else is possible. So that move is part of ongoing growth. More specifically for what we're talking about and it's going to cut right to the chase. When you hear something on the radio, and a lot of people listen to the radio, not so much on the coasts, but in the middle of this country, Salem Radio Network, Bott Radio Network, the American Family Radio Network, which are all Christian conservative networks, thousands of stations across the country. But anything, MSNBC, CNN, Fox, it doesn't matter, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, whatever, you get your news. Don't just take it as though it's true. I don't mean become a conspiracy theorist, but really find out, okay, is what that person just said provably true? Or is it commentary and an opinion? And if you're interested in the subject, do some research. Find out for yourself. Become self-authoring. Right? That's the move that we all have to make. Otherwise, we're going to do what wealthy, powerful, mostly white people tell us to do. And that's not good for anything close to democracy. So the basic lesson is get curious, stay curious, and do some work on your curiosity.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Definitely wise words to heed. As we like to wrap our show up by giving examples of individuals, either current or former, who we believe exhibit the behavior characteristics of being fully human. And I want to pass it over to you first to see who you have in mind.
I'm doomed. I was hoping you were going to go first. No, so I can. So this is somebody that it's a public figure, and it's not really it's not directly related to today's conversation, but somebody I've admired for some years now. Singer-songwriter Brandi Carlile, who has written some just amazing songs and has amazing voice and sings them really well. She's married and with there's definitely one kid. She's married to her wife, so she's a lesbian, and she's one of the clearest voices I've heard. When I said I don't mean when she sings, yeah, definitely, but when she's interviewed, the way she structures her relationship with her band, she has two heterosexual twins, two brothers, who have been with her for decades before she was famous. They've been playing together, and they kind of live in the same compound. Like their two families and her family live in the same compound. But when she's interviewed about everything, she's not confrontational. She doesn't put her beliefs in your face, but she's extraordinarily clear, and I would say loving, and definitely coming from an all of us perspective. So she seems like a good ambassador for me of being fully human. And the thing I both love and hate about her is maybe she's, I don't know if she's 40 yet. I mean, she's young, but wise and skillful. And so, yeah, so Brandi Carlile is a good example for me.
Okay. I'm going to have to look her up. I wasn't familiar with her. I'm going to go with Brad Pitt. And the reason I say the actor Brad Pitt is because what I love the way he moves, the fully humanness, behavior that he demonstrates, is he's been the executive producer behind some of the key movies that I've found to be very informative and entertaining as well, but movies that highlight certain Black individuals' careers or the life stories, biopics. He's been behind executive producing those movies, helping get those movies, and you never hear him talk about it. His name just appears, right? But you don't see him out there bragging and taking credit for it and trying to bring attention to the fact that he's doing this. And like recently, I just saw the Bob Marley movie One Love, and of course he was executive producer of that movie, which was shocking to see it to the credits roll. And I believe he did with James Brown as well, him along with Mick Jagger and some others. But just his willingness to do that. And like I said, there are several other movies that not come to mind right now. But I just want to highlight him because, you know, a lot of people consider they don't like the Bob Marley movie. I find it hard to not like the movie if you like him, Bob Marley, because you're going to hear his music in the movie. And of course, you can always find things that get left out. Wish they expanded more on this. Why did they do it this way? But to me, once I found that the family supported it, endorsed it, and were integral in selecting the actors and were there pretty much as consultants throughout, and his wife, Rita Marley, heavily endorsed it, that was enough for me to go see it. And like I said, I don't know if that movie would not have been brought had it not happened for Brad Pitt, but I just appreciate the fact that that's how he uses his capital. That's showing me that he's conscious to say these messages need to be told, and I'm going to do my part. I think he also played a part in this movie on Apple. It's called The Banker, which was about these two gentlemen back in the 60s and 70s that were buying real estate in California and then eventually opened the first Black bank. And it starred Samuel Jackson as one of the characters. And Brad Pitt was also responsible for producing that. So that's why I'm saying that he shows humanity in that context. It shows that he understands he has a platform, and I believe he uses it strategically and should be admired for some of the choices he makes in those areas.
Yeah, it's on my list to watch the Marley movie. So it's on my wait list.
I think you'll enjoy it. If you enjoy this music, you know some of the story. Of course, you can't use that as I tell folks. If your expectations to go there and saying with the musician, I know nothing about Bob Marley other than the fact that he was a musician, and so I'm going to learn so much more about him. Then you're going to be disappointed because it really only focuses on 2 years of his life, 3 years of his life, and they show some flashbacks, but mainly it's those 3 years of his life. So you're not going to learn a great deal about him if you don't already know that. But like I said, if you enjoy his music and you just really want to kind of get into his world for 2 hours, I think it serves that purpose for me. I recommend it to others as well.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you again, Reggie, for choosing such a wonderful topic. I think that we can kind of talk about a lot of these needed, I would say, timely topics on a weekly basis because with the upcoming election, I see continued forced tribalism, and you just see the energy that's being put out there by the media and the messaging to try to really show the the hate and I would say the suffering that the country's going through. The media wants to exploit that more. I think we definitely need to get more in these conversations, these topics. But I also want to thank our listening audience for listening to us today, whether it's live or you listen to the replay later on. We definitely appreciate it. And finally, every Wednesday, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do the Full Human Connections podcast. And until next week, let's all continue to work towards becoming more fully human. Thank you all for your time.